Welcome to the Architect My Business podcast. I'm Aya Schlachter, your host, founder, and CEO of MGS Global Group. We provide architectural drafting and rendering services for busy firm owners and designers. Recently, we added new services such as bookkeeping and digital marketing. I put aside my dream of being an architect and pivoted to serve architects. Since then, I've never looked back. MGS Global started as a part-time gig when I was a new mom drafting for architects in New York City. Now we serve small to large firms and publicly traded companies in retail and hospitality. The best part, I get to help architects maintain a better work-life balance so they can do more of what matters most. From starting out solo to now leading a team of over 45 and growing, I've learned a thing or two about making a business thrive. Whether you're thinking of starting, already managing, or want to take your business to the next level, this podcast is for you. Each episode is packed with simple, actionable tips in leadership, people, marketing processes, and of course, profit. I keep things real. Like you, I've got no time for fluff. This podcast is brought to you by MGS Global Group. Now, let's get into this episode. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, John Clayton. John is the founder of Architecture Business Club. Based in Norfolk, England, he's a chartered architectural technologist who has worked in architecture for over 2 decades as a sole practitioner for over 10 of those years. John struggled with the challenges of being a sole practitioner in architecture, so he's made it his mission to help architecture professionals around the world free up their time and build profitable, future-proof businesses that fit around their lives. He does this through his work as a coach, consultant, and a mentor, and through knowledge sharing on his top-rated weekly podcast, the Architecture Business Club podcast. Outside of work, John's a guitar-playing, kayaking, Lego building, movie trivia buff. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome, John. How are you today?
Well, thanks, Aya. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing really well.
That's great. I'm really excited that we got introduced by Sarah Collada months ago. We kind of have the same podcast name. I'm Architect My Business and your Architect Business Club, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's very similar. Very similar.
Yeah, I love meeting people who are trying to uplift the profession. So for me, right, like I started my business, MGS Global, without any formal business education, but it didn't stop me from becoming an entrepreneur. That's why I always say it is possible. But, starting a business comes with a lot of challenges, especially for architects. We're not taught any business skills in school at all. I know you talked about this on your podcast and how the lack of knowledge made it tough for you in the beginning. So can you share a little bit of your journey from being an architecture technologist to, starting the Architecture Business Club?
Absolutely, yeah. So I started out working in architecture straight from high school. So back in the mid-90s. And so I spent a long time in the industry, and that was a traditional local architecture practice, working alongside other architects. And I enjoyed the work and that experience that I had in those practices. And I think that at some point I decided that I'd liked the idea of having my own business. I think I'd had a desire to travel. I think that was one of the first things that gave me this idea of starting my own business. And I went off traveling, and I didn't come back and start a business straight away after I'd been backpacking around the world in my early 20s. But that desire to have my own business and to have more freedom and flexibility was something that was born out of that initial desire to travel and see the world and have some location independence. And that was further compounded when I met my wife, who was from the other side of the UK. So distance-wise, we're not talking the same distances as in the US, because, England's a much smaller country, but even so, we were sort of 200 miles apart. And then that meant that our families were that distance apart too. So when we started living together and we settled down, that there was always this thing of like, wherever I was based working, the family was the other side of the country. And I always had this desire thinking, well, wouldn't it be cool one day to have a business where I had a bit more freedom and flexibility in my life to be able to kind of work remotely and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of like how it started off. I went through the process of being made redundant from one of the practices I was at. And that was not a great experience, but it's something that architects from time to time do go through when they're working at other practices. And it was at that point I thought I want a bit more control over my destiny here. And it was when I started writing a bit of a business plan, and that led to me starting a side hustle architecture business, originally alongside a full-time role at another architecture practice. So it was a real exciting time. Sorry if I'm digressing here because...
No. This is great because as being in America, everything is also very location dependent, especially with your spouse, your partner. Sometimes you have a good job here and your spouse gets another job. So it's really important. But my question is, when you were working full time, you also started your job as your side gig as an architecture technologist, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
But were you married already that time?
Oh, crikey. That's a great question. I think that was, we were living together, but we weren't married at that point, but it was around the time when I was made redundant. Around that time, we'd had our first child. So we had a daughter who would have been around about 18 months. So I think that your priorities change when you become a parent.
Yeah.
So aside from this, it totally changes your life. And aside from this thing of losing what felt at the time like a very secure job role, and then having this underlying desire to have more independence and more freedom, and then also the added thing of becoming a parent, then this was the kind of catalyst that made me think, right, it's the time to kind of start this business thing. And because I'm not naturally a risk taker and usually quite cautious with things, I wasn't brave enough at the time to go like all in and just leave my job. And that's why it started off as a side hustle, which, was great for a time, but it has its challenges. As you know, that running a business can be a very time consuming thing. And particularly if you're also trying to do it while you're in a full-time role at another practice. And as kind of fortune would have it, the practice I was working at, they started to get a lot quieter. They went through a lean period while my own business was starting to grow. So it meant that there was this transition between the two, where I went down to a 4-day week in that practice and then went off and eventually had the confidence to just go, right, I'm going all in now. I'm going to launch my own architecture practice. And I think then there was a number of challenges that I encountered. That was the first challenge, was just having that confidence to just go all in and start the business in the first place and to go in full time. But then there was a lot of other challenges that I found as I was progressing with that business.
I think you are a risk taker. The fact that you had a job and still did your side gig, it's like forward thinking, right? Like who knew you were going to get laid off, right? So you already had this backup, side gig. I don't know. Is it because you wanted to do it already, or it was you're preparing to start your own? So I think that's really, very entrepreneurial, right?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, maybe I, again, my imposter syndrome and lack of self-belief sometimes in myself, I would say that I wasn't very brave, but perhaps I was. Because, I suppose that, generally speaking, like, not many people are business owners. Like, not many people choose to run their own business. Like, most people in our friendship and family circles, they wouldn't dream of running a business. Sometimes you have people in your family that do. My father, he was a small business owner, but most of my friendship circles, like all of my other friends, were employees. Like, nobody ran their own business, so it was a little bit like, why? Like, why? This is crazy. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you
This is
launching your own business? So yeah,
this is an exciting
crazy
journey. You
times.
basically took your challenge and turned it into an opportunity and just taking it to the next level. Um, so I don't have an MBA, but I believe that entrepreneurship can be learned with the right mindset and mentors, right? So let's talk about your free resource, the Architecture Business Blueprint. You call it the step-by-step formula to freedom for architects, architecture technologists, and designers. It's 71 pages of everything you need to know and craft your own business. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. I'm just blown away by the detail of it all. So can you give us a run through of what this is and the stages, just high level, because we want people to download it, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So this resource really was born out of my own experiences as a sole practitioner, and the fact that I'd identified over the years that there was some big knowledge gaps that I had that, like most people in architecture, that we don't get any business education. We're not taught business at architecture school. You know, this isn't something that often what happens is we decide to become either a freelancer or to start a business in architecture, and we set something up, and then we realize that there's all these other things about running a business that we haven't been taught how to do. And we can, you know, figure a lot of those things out through experience. And I guess I just thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a way to kind of shortcut some of that? And I tried to put something together as a workbook that would help people to just navigate their way a little bit, you know, to have a bit more clarity on how to set up their business and the types of things that they'd need to consider. So it covers, there's like 50 steps. So I'm not going to kind of go through all of them. And there's a few key stages. But ultimately, the beginning, the first stage is thinking about just laying the right foundations. So it's thinking about the big vision, like what is the end destination? Like, you know, where is it that you want to be in a few years' time? Because I think, like, when I started out, like I did have a business plan originally, but I didn't use it as a tool day to day in my business. Like, it was more so at the time, like, I put it together to try and secure some funding, some grant funding for the business. But I mean, it really should be a working, living document, and actually kind of, I think, having that longer term view of like, well, where we want to be in a few years' time can really help inform the choices that you make in your business today. So the first part's about sort of laying those business foundations, thinking about, where do I want to get to? What is my mission? Like, what is it that I really care about? Why does this business exist, and who is it serving? So really thinking about what your why is, what your mission is. And also, I believe that the vast majority of, particularly the sole practitioners, like most people, when they go freelance or start a business in architecture, they're not necessarily doing it because it's like, I just want to be a business owner, or I want to grow a huge team. Like, often it's because they want more freedom and flexibility in their life. They want more autonomy in the work that they do, more fulfillment from the type of projects they're working on. So I also encourage you to kind of think about, not just from a purely business point of view, but how it integrates with your personal life too. So thinking about work-life integration and, you know, some of your personal goals, how they're going to sit alongside how you run your business. So that's kind of the first part. It's really about setting the foundations. Then looks at some of the things that you need to be in control of, things like managing your finances, managing your time, some of the key things that can run away with themselves if they're not properly managed. And then also we look into strategies for your products and services that you sell in your practice, and how you can better package up your offers so that they make more sense to your customers. So using their language and providing services that meet them where they're at, So if you think about let's take the case example of an architect that works with homeowners. So somebody that might be doing a new build home or home extension renovation project, then, there might be a few different products and services that you offer depending on what stage they're at, because the time when they are, the consideration period when they're sort of thinking about doing a development like that, it's a really long period of time, like compared to selling other products and services in other industries. Like you could be thinking about that project for years before you actually decide to invest in the services of an architect. So it's thinking about how can we package things up to capture people's attention at very early stages when they're in that exploration, discovery stage, where they're just learning about what might be involved and exploring who they might work with, versus then having services that you can offer them for when they need an architect to work with and they're ready to hire. So I think that's something else that we look at that gives you some suggestions and of how you can kind of package things up differently. And then, we also look at different tactics for marketing. And that's the other thing, that with the marketing stage, that I don't believe there's like a one size fits all approach that's going to work for every practice, depending on your industry and your location, types of clients that you work with specifically. That's going to vary depending on a varying number of factors in your local marketplace and your particular niche within architecture. But the framework, the blueprint document, gives you a variety of suggestions that you can test out in your practice. And I would encourage people to, I like the idea of running like short experiments and say, pick things to try out within their business and then to test them out and to keep the things that work and then to quickly ditch the things that don't work. That's kind of like a broad overview. There might be a couple of bits that I've missed out there. But as I say, it's quite a big document. I don't have it completely memorized.
So I'd like to cover all the stages, obviously, if we have time. But again, John will put all the free resources on our show notes. But for now, I want to focus on my favorite topics in the blueprint, which is people, right? This topic resonates with me because I firmly believe that our success as entrepreneurs really depend on how we find, train, manage, retain the right team members, as well as our consultants and mentors. So in your experience, why do you think the people aspect is so crucial in running a business?
That's a great question. And you're right. It's a very important section within the blueprint document. And I believe that, I think there's this perception that when you start your own business in architecture, that we have this thing. I've heard business mentor Chris Ducker talk about this thing called superhero syndrome, where we think we can do everything. And actually, as architects, we're problem solvers. And the traditional business model for architecture practices is that we are, trained to be like an all service provider, where we provide services from inception to completion. And it's like, you should do all this stuff on your own, like you should be able to do all these things. And I would challenge that. There's actually more and more practices now are recognizing that there's so much that the average architect needs to learn and needs to know about in order to provide those services, that it's almost getting to the point now where it's like, it's unrealistic for somebody to be able to not only learn and maintain all of the skills to deliver a project from start to finish, but also to run a business as well. And I feel that, this thing of, I love the thing of sort of sticking to, do what you do best and delegate the rest. So to look at building out a team of collaborators, people that you can work with, whether that's having a team that's in-house or whether you're not wanting to manage an in-house team, to look at other opportunities like outsourcing some of the elements of your work, building out a team of collaborators. Maybe there's another practice that has complementary skills to your practice so that you can have a partnering arrangement to really build that out. So you think that in terms of what you're then able to offer your clients, in terms of the value that you deliver, like, how much better is it going to be for your clients that, rather than you trying to do everything yourself, where it's like, let's be honest, like nobody's going to be great at everything. So isn't it better that you focus on doing the bit that really lights you up, that you enjoy doing, the bit that you're good at, staying in your zone of genius, while you build a team around you that can help deliver all the other bits and probably do those things better than you're able to do yourself?
Yes, and I agree. Like, I'm a big believer on hiring consultants and mentors and coaches, because I see people not as an expense, but as an investment. And that's the problem that a lot of small firm owners, entrepreneurs, they can't wrap their head around paying a consultant to do the thing because it's an expense. But in reality, it's really an investment to your business, right? So my question for you is, you've worked in the business of helping architects. How do you switch that mindset for them to start really making them aware that, we as consultants, I do architecture support, you do, blueprint, your architecture coaching business consulting. How do you try to switch their mindset? Because that's the most difficult part.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting question. I think that it does need to be looked upon as a investment rather than a cost. But I think one of the things when people are looking at paying for, coaching or consulting or mentoring, I think all of those things, that the way that it's usually pitched, it can feel a little bit like a black box investment where the outcomes and deliverables from it aren't always clear, that people realize that they need some help with something. But the way that the way that it's typically pitched to them is that it's just, pay this much money a month and eventually we'll just figure it out, So I think if you can communicate, and this actually comes down to as well, something that's applicable for architects in packaging their services, that like customers are interested in the afters. They're interested in the outcomes that they're going to get. They often don't care what the process is, the mechanism of how they get there, but they want the results. So from a sort of coaching consultancy perspective, if you're able to clearly articulate if you have a framework or a blueprint or process, like the document that I have, where we can guide people through a process where they can visualize it. They can see, okay, I'm starting here and I go from A to B and this is the end result. If that can be articulated in some way, either in your copywriting, in your marketing, on your website, then it's going to make it much easier to be able to sell that particular service. And as I say, the same you can apply to architectural services and packaging up your architecture, that, to the average customer that might not have worked with an architect before, which in many cases, particularly if you're working with like homeowners, they often haven't worked with an architect before. So if you can apply those principles into how you package up your services and make it really clear about the process that you're going to take them through, what they're going to get out of it and what the deliverables are and what the timescales are as well, so that they can understand it. And also, if you can find a way to quantify the value added. So that's the other thing, that if you're saving them time, if you're going to be saving them money, if the service that you're providing, in the case of architects, if it's going to be increasing the value of their building, you're going to be making their life easier in some way, that if you can quantify that, then that's really going to help you price and position your services.
I love that you say you have to always establish the after and the outcomes and also quantify it, because at the end of the day, we're running a business and we want to make sure we can feed our kids next week, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want any starving children at my house.
So I get this question a lot, because I started my business with just me and another drafter, and now we're like a team of 50 plus. So people ask me, who were the first consultants that you hired? So my question for you is, I don't know if it's universal in the UK or in the US, but what do you see in terms of small firm owners is the first person that they should hire as a consultant? I'm just generalizing, right? Based on what you know.
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Okay. I, the first hire that I made, and I'll share a couple of hiring experiences, and then we'll talk about kind of what worked and then maybe what didn't work so well, and then some recommendations moving forward. The first thing that I ever kind of like outsourced, so this wasn't like hiring a permanent member of staff, was when I was doing architecture, was the measured building surveys. So that was usually one of the first things that I did with clients, that we'd go out and have an initial meeting and take measurements of the building. And when I started to get busier, that was the first thing that I outsourced. It was kind of like the lowest hanging fruit, because it was something that it was relatively easy for me to find. I actually used you could look at them as a competitor. It was a local architecture company, very similar to myself. And I employed them to go and do the surveys, because it didn't require a huge amount of effort in terms of writing SOPs and training. They were already doing it in their own practice. It was really easy. And I just made sure that in the pricing of those projects, that the cost was built into the pricing, and I made money on the next part. I did then experiment a little bit with outsourcing over the years. I hired a VA. So that was one of my first like more permanent staff members, was a part-time VA, virtual assistant, for those that don't know the terminology. And actually, in hindsight, I actually made that hire a little bit too early, in my opinion, because as a small business, I was a business of one. I made that hire, and the type of work that the VA was going to be doing was a lot of the administrative work. So it was admin, inbox management, that sort of thing, and a little bit of help with, graphic design, creating graphics for social media, that sort of thing. But at the time, I wasn't a regular content creator. So I didn't have a podcast, and I was a bit inconsistent with my digital marketing. And I didn't have I recognized that I needed some additional resources to help me grow. But with the benefit of hindsight, I probably should have hired somebody to help out with more of the drafting work, the actual architectural work, rather than hiring the VA. The VA would have been a great hire, particularly since now that I have a weekly podcast, because there's a lot more admin involved, and there's a lot more, there's every single week there is, social media posts to create and captions to write and that sort of thing. And actually a lot of it is repeating tasks. So it's actually quite easy to document and create SOPs, standard operating procedures, for somebody else to do that. So looking back, I'm not sure if the VA would be my first hire. I think if I was looking to sort of save some time and I was a practicing architect, I would be looking perhaps to try and outsource some of the architectural work, because that's the thing that makes you money. So it's like when you're looking to outsource things, sometimes what happens is we will tend to outsource something because maybe it's something that requires less skill to do, but it might not necessarily. So the hire could be cheaper, hiring the staff member. But in my case, it was cheaper to do that, but it didn't buy me back enough time to make the investment worthwhile. And I had a staff member then to manage, even though it was a remote team member. Right. So it didn't deliver the result that I was looking for. Whereas had I outsourced more of the architectural work at the time, that was earning money. So like if that freed up time to be able to do more projects, and I was able to pass that cost on to my clients anyway, that would have made far more sense. So if you're sort of looking to grow and you're debating whether to hire a VA first or whether to hire somebody to do the architectural work, again, depending on your circumstances, if the main thing that you're spending your time doing is the architecture, which is what I was doing at that time, that really was the thing that I should have outsourced. If you are somebody that is a content creator. So if you're an architecture practice that's also got a podcast or writing a weekly blog, doing short form video every week, maybe you're doing TikTok videos or something like that, then okay, maybe there's some sense in hiring a VA, because you'll know as a content creator that there's a lot of repeating tasks that you will do. And when you have something that's a repeating task, it's much easier to successfully outsource it to somebody else. The other thing I would say is that if you are like many of the architects out there, the practice owners that know that they got some gaps in their business knowledge, actually one of those things that should be worth investing in earlier rather than later is actually finding somebody to help you with some business education. So whether that's investing in, there's a number of different ways you could do this. So you could hire and work with a local business coach or mentor. You could work with somebody like me. There are other architecture training organizations, and there are architect specific mentoring and coaching companies out there. Like, I'm not the only person in the industry that offers this, but I would explore those opportunities as well, because it doesn't necessarily have to cost a fortune. So if you're at that kind of startup stage, but it could be one of the best things that you invest in, because I know that, you know, over kind of 10 years being a sole practitioner, there are so many preventable mistakes, big business mistakes that I've made that have cost me a lot of time and money. And had I had some more business education in the early days, a lot of that would have been preventable. And I have no doubt that I would have been far more successful over the last decade than I was already by having some support and guidance in those areas.
So I love it that, you know, a lot of the architects, especially small firm owners, huge chunk of their time with architecture drafting. And it does make sense to transfer the cost. And that's very easy to find, right? It's not like you're looking for another architect in your firm. There's a lot of, you know, collaborators, students, new graduates you can hire, or different companies. So I think that's really also one of the things that architects need to do is kind of let go of control, because a lot of architects like to control every single detail in the drawings. In the overall scheme of things, you're just losing time and money if you're just keep on controlling.
There's an opportunity cost. Like if you're spending all day working on a detail, that, again, it's like I look back at some of the ways that I used to work and what I would do in my working day, and you just think it's madness in some ways, because it's like there's so many other things that I could have been doing that would have helped to grow my business, to get more sales, to increase my bottom line. Because at the end of the day, we're passionate about architecture, but, you know, we're not doing this as a charity. Like, we're trying to make a living. We're trying to, you know, feed our families and to grow our businesses. And, you know, if you are spending all day drafting things out and then running around like a headless chicken to try and do sales meetings in the evenings and things, and you have to kind of question, like, you know, you're really getting in your own way. You need to get out of your own way and allow yourself a bit of space to be able to grow your business so that it's going to be sustainable in the future. Otherwise, like, what happens is you end up in this cycle of feast and famine. So when you're really busy, you just work, and it's nearly all project work, and then firefighting, serving our clients' needs, and then not necessarily doing what we need to do to help develop and grow our business, and neglecting business and marketing. And then we get to a lean period once we've finished all those projects, and it's like, oh, I haven't got any projects now. Like, I don't have much work, because you've been like neglecting the strategic business planning and the marketing that should have been happening alongside actually delivering the work for the clients. So
and one thing I like about your business blueprint is like your money makers, because we need to think outside the box. And I like that you're thinking about productized service offerings, right? Like, you know, what is your high impact offer, everyday offer, digital products, extra income? You know, we need somebody like you to help architects like really think about the lean periods, right? When they have a lean period in their project pipeline, they have other things that you can share in your blueprint. For instance, like yeah, again, it's like a 70, there are 70 check marks and like 7 stages. So I encourage everyone to download your
Absolutely.
blueprint. But
There's huge
yeah,
opportunities there, Aya. I mean, you mentioned there about extra income and about the idea of, I mean, one example, digital products. There's an architect based in the UK called Ross Hartland. We'll give him a shout out from Initiate Architecture. He's like blowing up on Instagram. He's got like over 100,000 followers now, and he's been sharing behind the scenes snippets of what he does in his practice. But he started selling some digital products, and like in the last financial year, the sales of those relatively simple digital products the revenue was more from the digital products than from the architectural services, because he is a practice of one. So if you're going to be a practice of one and build what I would call a lifestyle business in architecture, like you're going to have to find some ways to leverage your time. Because if you don't find some ways to leverage your time by either creating some digital products or building an outsourced team, having a way of kind of multiplying your time and your impacts, like you're going to really quickly hit this glass ceiling. Like your earning capacity is going to be so limited. So that's just an example of one other architect that has more than doubled their income by introducing just a small number of digital products into their mix, and also being consistent with their marketing. In that example, they're using Instagram and they're doing short form video. I'm not suggesting that that's the route for every single practice, but it's just one example of what's possible.
and one thing too about that, I know we're going to wrap up soon, but marketing is important. Architects should show themselves, their hobbies, what they do for a living, because people buy from people, right? I mean, when I see Instagram and I just see the projects, okay, you have amazing projects, but who's the person behind that? Are they, hiking? Are they cold plunging? Cause I like to cold plunge. I'll probably, if I see a fellow architect who's also doing the things that I like to do, I would probably hire that person because of our common interest. So it's hard for architects to be on camera. It took me a while to be like doing the podcast. And one more thing, like about the, like his Instagram is now blowing up. I met this podcaster, just you and I because we're both podcasters. He has a main business, but the podcast has blown over. Like he's now a 7-figure podcaster, but not traditional, right? It's not through subscription, but because he was trying different things, he was able to monetize in more ways than he can imagine. Like this is all very exciting. And one of the things also that my father told me, he's an entrepreneur. I said, Dad, I don't have an MBA, but I want to be successful. This is one thing I can offer. He said, just study business accounting, like know your numbers, like know how to read financial statements, profit and loss, right? Your balance sheet. So that's, you can learn that in a day, right? If you can spend hours and hours drafting, you can spend a whole day just learning how to manage your finances. I mean, it's a whole thing about running a business. And I understand you ran your business for 10 years. You've made a lot of mistakes. The mistakes that you've learned has probably helped with this architecture business blueprint. And based on your bio, you do a lot of things like, you play the guitar, look at the guitar at the back. You love to kayak. I tried reaching out to you. You were out hiking. You like shut down, right? And then you're a movie trivia buff. Yeah. So you're living proof of it can be done, and you have a family.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. It's not all about the work. And I think that you're absolutely right that when we look at the marketing assets that most practices have, like most practices will have some kind of website, and you go on the website and like, where are the people? Like, people buy from people. And you go on the architecture websites traditionally, and there's beautiful pictures of finished building projects, and maybe there's some examples of details and drawings and that sort of thing. But like, where are the people behind the business? Like, I'd love to see more architecture websites where we go on there, and yes, we do see the projects and the type of work, but we also see like, who are the founders of the business? Who's the team? Like, who's the wider team? Like, what are they all about? Like, what why does this particular architecture firm exist? You know, what's the kind of shared vision that this team has? You know, what's the difference that they're making in the world? And what do they do outside of work? Because those little snippets of like life outside of work, like you mentioned about, I play the guitar and I like to build Lego. I've got a Lego DeLorean from Back to the Future here. You know, all these little things is just, it makes you so much more human to your customers. And it just makes it instantly relatable. Like you cease to be just like a sort of salesperson from ABC Architects, and you actually become a person that's fully rounded. And, you know, it's just so much more relatable. So yeah, I think that, the people aspect of things and building your personal brands, we could talk about that for a whole other hour, which
the next episode.
The next episode,
we'll schedule another one on personal branding. I'm open to it. If you are,
that would be cool. Yeah, because that's something that it's not easy getting over, like camera shyness and showing up. Like the vast majority of people, unless you are like, unless you're a really unusual kind of person, like most people, like are really uncomfortable being on camera. You know, we all have that. And actually, most of the people that you see online that are on YouTube and are on Instagram and all of that, you know, they've had to get over that. They've had to get over themselves and just get used to putting themselves out there. And it does get easier over time. But like I'm not naturally an extroverted person. I can't stand having my photo taken, and I'm not a fan of being on camera, but like over time, like you just get used to doing it, and it's the best way to connect with people.
And people need to do the hard thing, right? If success were that easy, everyone will be successful, right? Right, John? It's hard to do the hard thing, make mistakes, show up on camera, speak in public, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like
hire a coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not doing anything at all in your business that makes you feel uncomfortable, then your business is not going to grow. So business growth happens when you move outside of your comfort zone and you start doing some of those things that feel a little bit more challenging and a little bit more uncomfortable for you. And I mean, certainly that's been my experience, that even since starting my own podcast and showing up every week, that's been transformational in a relatively short period of time, just by showing up every week and just being me. And like, you know, that's the thing, is that if you can just be yourself, like you don't have to try and be somebody else. And that's the thing, that as well as from an architectural point of view, that it is like one of your USPs of your practice is you, like your unique way of doing things, the way that you are, the way that you communicate with your clients, like all of those things about yourself that, you know, you need to kind of amplify all of that stuff, because it really makes you stand out against your competitors. You know, instead of those other bland, generic architecture companies that we see in every town, like who's the one that's going to stand out? You know, it's going to be you.
You and I have to do a concert together then. You know, we'll collaborate. You play the guitar, I sing. Filipinos are big on karaoke. Maybe we do that one day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure your vocals are amazing. I'm not sure about my guitar skills, but again, you know, maybe it's okay. People might tune in. Somebody will listen.
Yeah. So my last question is, where do we find you? Your lead magnet? How do we work with you? So anything you want to share before we wrap up our interview?
Absolutely. So the best place to connect with me on socials is on LinkedIn. So if you head over to LinkedIn, you can find me on there. Just search for John Clayton, it's Jon. And the website is architecturebusinessclub.com. If you head over to architecturebusinessclub.com, there is, on every page, you'll see a form where you can pop in your name and your email, and you can get a link to download your own copy of the Architecture Business Blueprint without charge. That's complimentary from me as a gift. And I would love to hear from people. That please, you know, send me a message on LinkedIn, a connection request. You can contact me via the website. There's a contact form on there. drop me a message. I'd love to have a conversation.
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome. Me too. Thanks, Aya.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Architect My Business podcast. If you want more, head over to architectmybusiness.com for more episodes, show notes, and links to everything mentioned in this episode. Don't forget to catch our mini shows, First Pace, Ask Aya, and our main show, Architect My Business. If you enjoyed our episodes and want to hear more, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your feedback really helps us grow. Stay tuned for the next episode. Bye!